This is a story of the Wild Swans by Hans Christian Andersen. Once upon a time, in a faraway land, an aging king lived with his 11 sons and only daughter, Elisa. Although his queen had long since died, he tried to bring up the princes to be strong and fearless, and the little princess to be kind and generous. They all lived together happily in their castle. But one day, the king married again, unaware that his new wife was a dangerous witch. From the very day of the royal wedding, the new queen hated her stepchildren and wanted only to be rid of them. The evil queen soon devised a cruel spell and cast it over her 11 stepsons. Overnight, they were changed into 11 wild swans wearing little gold coronets. But the queen was not satisfied at that. "Fly away," she shrieked. "I command you. Fly far beyond the borders of our kingdom and never come back." The 11 swans flew off, but the queen still was not satisfied until she had also banished the gentle Elisa to live with a poor woodcutter at the farthest edge of the forest. When the old king asked for his children, the wicked queen replied, "Your sons are good-for-nothings and have gone off to find some mischief to do, and your daughter never wants to see you again." Elisa lived for years with the woodcutter's family, but never forgot her brothers, and when she was 15, she set off to search for them. She wandered far and wide, asking in vain for her brothers, but one day she happened to ask an old woman gathering herbs near the sea. "I have not seen your brothers," the woman replied, "but I have seen 11 wild swans with golden crowns on their heads." "Where? Oh, please tell me," cried Elisa. "There, on the beach," said the old woman. "They come in from the sea every evening." Elisa ran to the shore and sat watching the sky till evening. Finally, she heard a great fluttering of wings, and towards her flew 11 wild swans. Elisa ran to them, crying, "My brothers, I have found you at last." The swans joyfully recognized their sister, and just as the last rays of the sun disappeared, they turned into the brothers she had loved so well. "We must go about as swans from sunrise to sunset," they explained, "but after dusk, we can again appear in our human form." "Tell me everything," begged Elisa. "Where do you live?" "Far away, dear sister," they answered. "To reach our new home, we must travel for 2 long days to the other side of the great sea. We rest for the night in our human shapes on a rock in the middle of the ocean, and the next day we fly on to our beautiful new homeland." The brothers explained sadly that they were only allowed to visit their father's kingdom once a year, and only for a few days. Elisa wept when she heard that in just 2 days they must leave. "Then take me with you," she sobbed. At first her brothers refused her plea. "It's too far," they said, "and it's too dangerous." Finally, Elisa persuaded them that now that they had found each other at last, they must never be parted again. "We'll make a net," they decided, "and carry her in it." All night long they worked at weaving the net, and before dawn it was ready. At the first rays of sunlight, the 11 princes again became 11 swans. Elisa jumped into the net, and the swans flew off, carrying her with them high over land and sea. They crossed over oceans and rivers, castles and cities, and even flew across the marvelous realm of fairyland, where the good fairy Morgana was queen. Finally, they arrived at their distant homeland and gently laid Elisa down to sleep. "When you awake," Morgana continued, "gather the stinging nettles growing in the glen and weave them into 11 shirts. As soon as your brothers put on these shirts, they will be free of their cruel enchantment. But I warn you, my child, the sharp and stinging nettles will hurt you most keenly." "I don't care, I shall endure anything for my dear brothers," said Elisa. "Very well," Morgana went on. "Now hear my final word. From the time you begin to gather the nettles until the last shirt is finished, you must remain silent. If you speak but one word, your brothers will all die. Remember." As soon as she awoke, Elisa remembered her dream and ran to gather the stinging nettles. By nightfall, her hands were sore and bleeding, but even when her brothers questioned her, she did not answer them. From that day on, not a single word passed Elisa's lips. In silence, she gathered nettles and wove the shirts. Her hands were raw and bleeding, and she wept with pain, but she wept silently. Her brothers could not understand her behavior. "Little sister," they pleaded, "speak to us." But Elisa only smiled at them and kept on weaving. One day, the young king of the land came riding by with his hunting dogs. He stopped to question Elisa as she sat weaving. But when she did not answer, he became curious and stayed to watch her, enchanted by her beauty and gentleness. By the time his courtiers met up with him again, he was deeply in love with a mysterious young maiden. "I will dress her in silks and velvets and put a crown on her head," he said to his chamberlain. Although his chamberlain tried to dissuade him, the king put Elisa on his horse and led her back to his castle. Nor could Elisa break her silence to protest that she must stay in the glen to finish the shirts for her brothers. Unwilling and heartbroken, she rode off with the king. And though back at the castle the king showered her with rich gifts, Elisa never smiled. She sat in sadness through festive banquets and balls, never speaking or smiling. The young king wished to make her happy, but he did not succeed until one day he returned to the glen, where he had found her and brought back with him a bundle of nettles and the shirts she had been weaving. At last, Elisa smiled and quickly began to work again. Day after day, she worked in silence, grieved that she was unable to reveal her secret to the young king, whom she now dearly loved. When the 7th shirt was finished, she needed more nettles to continue and remembered that the castle graveyard was the only place within the walls where they grew. That night, wrapped in a black cloak, she tiptoed there, trembling with fear. The royal chamberlain, who had always believed the strange girl was a witch, saw her leave and ran quickly to the king. "She's a witch, sire," he cried breathlessly. "I always suspected her, and now I can prove it." "I don't believe it," thundered the king. "It's true, sire, and one night you will see for yourself," replied the chamberlain as he left. The king was deeply disturbed by this event, but he said nothing to Elisa. Finally, 10 shirts were done, but Elisa still needed more nettles to finish the last one. Once again she crept out to the graveyard, never suspecting that the king and his chamberlain were watching behind her. "Now do you believe me, sire?" whispered the chamberlain in triumph. The king looked at Elisa as she knelt by a mossy tombstone, and his heart was broken. "I believe you," he said. The next day he condemned Elisa to be burned as a witch within the week and imprisoned her in a terrible dungeon to await death. He took away her silks and velvets and made her wear the rough cloth she had woven of nettles. But she was happy nevertheless because she could finish the last shirt. When it was finished, she would die willingly, knowing that she had freed all her brothers. The night before Elisa was to die, a swan appeared at her dungeon window. It was the youngest of the 11 princes. "Dear sister," he whispered, "we have been searching the whole world for you. Be patient. I shall call the others, and we shall come back to save you." But her brothers did not come, and the next morning rough jailers took Elisa in a wooden cart past the crowds to her place of execution. She did not look up until she had sewed the last stitch on the last shirt. As she broke off the final thread, there was a great noise in the sky, and 11 swans swooped down and gathered beside her on the cart. Elisa almost cried aloud, but quickly instead she threw one of the nettle shirts over each of the swans. Instantly the swans became 11 princes again and embraced their sister. "You have freed us," they cried. "Now we shall free you." The crowd gasped in amazement at the miracle they had just seen. The young king came towards the cart and listened in wonder as the princess revealed their whole story. If only you had spoken, the king said sadly to Elisa, as he begged for her forgiveness. I dared not, sire, but now I can speak of my love, and I forgive you gladly. The king clasped her hand and announced to his subjects that the generous and innocent girl would become his queen, and her 11 brothers would be the princes of his realm. The very next morning, the princes gave their sister's hand in marriage to the king, and there was a general happiness in his kingdom that day and forever after. The end.